Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, depending on where you are around the world. Welcome to today's webinar of the European Goose Management Platform. It continues the series of popular and well-attended EGMP webinars that was launched a few months ago. My name is Sergey Dereliev, and I'm the Head of Science Implementation and Compliance at the Secretariat of the Agreement on the Conservation of African Eurasian Migratory Waterbirds, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. Past webinars looked into various specific topics dealt with under the EGMP, but today we are going to present the EGMP itself, its objectives, its structures and processes. While many range states and stakeholders are routinely involved in the work of the EGMP and well acquainted with what it is and how it works, many others have only heard about this program. And today's event will offer the opportunity for a better understanding of the EGMP. We'll have three speakers who will make introductions to the EGMP from different angles, and we will then have a facilitated Q&A session. You'll hear from Gitte Jensen, who is the Goose Monitoring Coordinator in the EGMP Data Centre based in Aarhus University in Denmark, as well as from Eva Meyers, who is the EGMP Coordinator based at the UNEP AEWA Secretariat in Bonn, in Germany, as well as a short introduction from myself. Please post your questions into the chat during the introductions, and we'll go through them in the following Q&A session. So without further ado, let us start with the first brief introduction, which will be given by myself. In the first place, let us look into the AEWA provisions, the provisions of the treaty which underpin the European Goose Management Platform. There are two articles in the legal text, one of which establishes the obligation for the parties to maintain waterbird populations or restore them to a favorable conservation status. This is Article 2.1. And another article, which is 3.2b, which requires that any use of migratory waterbirds is based on the assessment of the best available knowledge and is sustainable for the species and the ecological system that supports them. Further provisions are those in the action plan of the agreement, which is Annex 3. And first one is paragraph 2.2.1, which establishes the need for the parties to cooperate on the development and implementation of single species action plans, which are recovery plans, for populations listed in category 1 of column A of table 1, as well as of those listed with an asterisk in column A of table 1. And those with an asterisk are usually huntable populations. They're an exception from the rule, since category 1 or column A in table 1 are normally species which are in poor conservation status and require conservation measures in place. The next provision is contained in paragraph 4.3.4, under which the parties are required to establish single species management plans for populations which are causing significant damage to economic sectors such as agriculture or fisheries. Based on these provisions, in the agreement strategic plan for the period 2009-2017, the parties agreed on target 2.5, under which adaptive harvest management of quarry populations was required to be ensured at international level. And as indicator for this target, the parties have set the establishment of harvest management plans for 2 quarry populations. Based on the strategic plan, in 2012, the first international single species management plan was adopted under the agreement for the Svalbard population of the pink-footed goose. That was at the 5th session of the meeting of the parties. At the following session of the meeting of the parties in 2015, another plan this time an action plan, a recovery plan, was adopted for the tiger bean goose, but contained elements of adaptive harvest management. At the same session of the meeting of the parties required and asked for the development of management plans for 2 further goose species, the barnacle goose and the grey-lag goose. And at the same session again in 2015, through resolution 6.4, the parties agreed on a direct mandate for establishment of the European Goose Management Platform. And here we have an excerpt from that resolution, which requested the Secretariat to facilitate the establishment of a European multi-species goose management platform and a process to address sustainable use of goose populations and to provide for the resolution of human-goose conflicts. We already had 2 plans in place and there were 2 more in the pipeline, so it was only logical for the countries to cluster all of that under a coherent program. In identifying the need for European Goose Management Platform, several points were outlined which justified the establishment of such a program. In the first place, it was clear that the goose-human conflicts and ecosystem impacts continue to continuous and are becoming more acute and more complex with the time. At the same time, geese are holding certain societal values, such as they are subject of birdwatching interest as well as of hunting, and they also provide important ecosystem services. As it was already mentioned at the time, there were 2 plans adopted for the Svalbard pink-footed goose, which was a management plan, and the tiger bean goose, which was an action plan. And there was a request for the development of 2 further management plans for the barnacle and the grey-lag goose. For populations such as the tiger bean goose, for example, the adaptive harvest management is required by their listing on AEWA in order to continue hunting practice. This is one of the populations which is listed in column A and is marked with an asterisk. In order to achieve such adaptive harvest management, however, what is required in the first place is a coordinated approach to data collection and processing of demographic parameters such as population size as a minimum, as well as harvest rates and derogation shooting. And this was not in place at the time. And in order to put in place such a coordinated approach, a platform of this kind would have been a suitable tool. At the same time, some of the goose populations were in unfavorable conservation status, and they continue to be in unfavorable conservation status. And in order to resolve that, local or national approach would unfortunately not bring a tangible solution. What is required here, or what was required at the time, was a structured flyway scale decision-making process. And last but not least, a goose management platform was seen as a precursor or a model for further expanding into sustainable use of water birds in general, not only geese. So these were the justifications that were identified in order to launch the establishment of such an important initiative. This happened at the Paris meeting, which was convened in May 2016 by the UNEP AEWA Secretariat and was attended by nearly all participating range states at this point in time. At this meeting, the countries reconfirmed their commitment to establish such a program and also agreed on the modalities which were proposed by the Secretariat. At that meeting, also, we agreed on the goal of the EGMP, which is summarized in this text box here. And this is distilled information from what you saw earlier in the earlier slides. The EGMP was seen as a mechanism for a structured, coordinated, and inclusive decision-making and implementation process for sustainable use and management of goose populations in Europe, with the objectives first to maintain them in a favorable conservation status, while taking into account various concerns of relevant stakeholders, and the pertinent legislative frameworks and regulations. And in this case, this does not only apply to AEWA. There is a number of those at national and regional level, such as the European Union Birds Directive and others. And as I already mentioned earlier, the EGMP at the time when it was conceived as an idea, it was seen as a precursor to a pan-European program to provide for the sustainable harvest and conservation of huntable species. So this was how the EGMP was established at the time, based on the legal provisions of the treaty and further decisions of the meeting of the parties, which prompted this initiative to be launched in 2016. With this, I'm concluding my brief introduction to the background of the EGMP. And now I will hand over to Eva Meyers, who will go deeper into the EGMP itself, and she will present you with more information on how it's structured and how this platform works. Thank you, and Eva, over to you.
All right, thank you very much. I hope you can see my screen and hear me well. Thank you for the introduction, Sergey. And I will try to be brief and walk you through the EGMP structure and the processes currently in place that hopefully in a short time you will get an overview of how the platform is working, which are the different bodies and entities, how they're functioning. And after that, my colleague Gitte will get even deeper into more specific issues that are dealt with by the various plans and processes under the EGMP. So as mentioned before, the goal of the EGMP is to have this innovative European-wide platform that will enable this coordinated and inclusive decision-making process amongst various range states and also stakeholders and experts concerned, taking into consideration, as Sergey mentioned, the legislative frameworks, concerns, and also taking into account the conservation status of the different species. Currently, under the management platform, we've got the following species and population. The pink-footed goose, the Svalbard population, with a management plan since 2012. The tiger bean goose, the action plan adopted at the 6th meeting of the parties since November 2015. The grey-lag goose Northwest-Southwest European population, with a management plan adopted in December 2017. Alongside the barnacle goose Russia, here we have two populations, Russia, Germany, and Netherlands population, as well as the East Greenland, Scotland, and Ireland population, and also adopted in December 2017. From these different populations and species, we have many range states being participants of the European members of the European Goose Management Platform. In this map, you can see an overview. Our newest member is Ireland, who unfortunately I haven't been able to update the map yet, but has joined the platform last year and has already been involved in various processes beforehand. And Spain, I've kept hearing greenish since they're not officially members of the platform, but they have been contributing in the grey-lag goose process. And we have a few non-participating range states, which, however, have in one or other ways been involved in some stages of the various processes in the platform, whether that is with expert advice or attending one or the other meetings. So the organizational structure of the EGMP might seem a bit complex, but in fact it is not so. And I will walk you through the different bodies and entities Under the European Goose Management Platform, the European Goose Management International Working Group was established. And this working group is the main coordinating and decision-making body of the platform. It's composed of representatives of national governments, and this can be from the ministries of environment or agriculture, as well as nominated national experts, which are defined and nominated by the government representatives and serve as advisors to the national governments, as well as experts on the topics. And the European Commission is also part of the working group, as well as a number of permanent observer organizations and other relevant stakeholders. The permanent observer organizations are international organizations, and they have one representative that is approved to be part of the international working group. The working group meets on an annual basis to decide on adjustments of the management frameworks, prioritization of the planned processes, work plans, share experiences, and any other emergent issues. And having this annually recurring meetings is allowing the platform to be adaptive and to have a more dynamic decision making, keeping the current up-to-date information provided, feeding directly into processes for management and conservation of the species. And this is a picture of the international working group in one of our face-to-face meetings when we still were able to do that. We're keeping the fingers crossed this year we will see each other again. So it is a very diverse group, and underneath the international working group, it was decided to establish a series of task forces dealing with various issues. So at the moment, we have 6 different task forces. 5 of these task forces are dealing with species-specific issues. There's one task force for the pink-footed goose, one for the tiger bean goose, one for the grey-lag goose, and for the barnacle goose, we have established 2 task forces, one focused on the Greenland population and one on the Russian population. Each of these task forces has a different coordinator, and that coordinator is from a country of the range, and it can be either a national government representative or an expert or a stakeholder representative. And essentially, the task of this coordinator is to convene the meetings, to put together recommendation documents, to facilitate the discussion within these different task forces. And we also have a cross-cutting task force, which is the agriculture task force, which is basically dealing with various issues that are that concern different populations, and where there's like more of a shared space across the populations. But essentially, the role of these task forces, which are the active and more dynamic bodies of the platform working in between these annual meetings of the International Working Group, is to support the International Working Group by suggesting implementation priorities, emerging issues, assist with the monitoring, data gathering of species populations together with the EGMP Data Centre, stimulate and support scientific research, provide feedback on scientific research that has any relevance to the platform, facilitate the internal and external communication and exchange of the scientific, technical, legal, and other required information. As I mentioned before, the task forces meet several times a year. Normally this is virtually, and there's a face-to-face meeting back-to-back with a meeting of the International Working Group whenever that is possible. And yeah, and the coordination really varies across the range of the countries. And essentially the task forces have been developing their own work plans, but also supporting the development of identifying key activities in the different range state countries and providing reports and recommendations to the annual meetings of the International Working Group. Just as an example, the Agriculture Task Force, our cross-cutting task force, has also produced fantastic outputs, such as this publication providing an overview of the management measures for geese in range states of the EGMP platform. This technical report is available on the EGMP website, and it's definitely worth reading. And it was a very big joint effort by all the representatives of the countries providing data, and then the task force compiling this very good overview and report, which then has fed into some of the next steps in the management and the decisions of the platform. And another thing that the Agriculture Task Force has kicked off, but it's one of the reasons why we're having this webinar here today, is the series of EGMP webinars, one of which was, for example, how to manage agricultural damage and conflict. There was another webinar organized by that task force, but also a few other webinars throughout the EGMP family. So again, I am really flying over these different bodies, but underneath the whole structure of the EGMP, the coordination bodies are the AEWA EGMP Secretariat and the EGMP Data Centre, who is at the same time also coordinating the International Modeling Consortium. So the main role of the EGMP Data Centre is to oversee the entire data management and assessments, to conduct these annual assessments and population assessments, propose management options for the annual decision making at each of the International Working Group meetings every year, and to lead on the data collection and monitoring, as well as with the wider coordination of the platform, together with the AEWA Secretariat, which is where I am based, and which essentially services and coordinates the overall process of the EGMP, including the respective bodies, the range states, and the administration as well. As I mentioned before, the Data Center has also established and well, it is coordinating the International Modeling Consortium. And this is again like a fantastic way of showing the collaboration in the wider range of different research institutes that pull together data from all over the range for the different populations to develop estimates on population sizes and assess harvest data based on the state-of-the-art modeling and develop new models, new concepts. It's a constant, very dynamic group that benefits from each other's knowledge and is sharing this experience and producing amazing scientific outputs. There's a whole list of partners, and I'm sure I have to update this list as well with new partners joining. The Modeling Consortium also meets once or twice a year. It really depends, at least once, to prepare all the documentation that is then going as meeting documents to the International Working Group, and that is used for the decision-making processes under the different management and action plans. So with that, I've walked you through the main structure and the bodies of the EGMP, and I would now like to go through a very quick review on the main milestones of the EGMP since its establishment, some of which have already been mentioned by Sergey early on, such as the management plan for the swallow population of the pink-footed goose, which was the first trial of an adaptive harvest management plan for a migratory population in Europe, and has been a model for the development of the next management plans in the platform. And what used to be the Pink-Footed Goose International Working Group has merged now with the EGMP and is pretty much the same people that are now part of the Pink-Footed Goose Task Force as well. The next plan under the EGMP is the action plan for the conservation of the tiger bean goose. And as mentioned before as well, this is a plan, an action plan, which is different to the management plan since it has a recovery objective of the population and a adaptive management program was also initiated underneath this plan as part of that process. And one of the biggest successes here so far was that an international consensus had been reached between the various range states on how to reduce hunting to enable the species to recover. So it's a task force as well that has actively been pushing and monitoring and supporting this process and this great collaboration between the range states to enable the recovery of the tiger bean goose population. Again, for the development of the grey-lag goose and the barnacle goose plans, there's been a mandate and a justification that Sergey had introduced in his presentation, but essentially it also goes back into the increasing population sizes of these two species, and that has led to organizing a meeting, stakeholder meeting for the barnacle goose, which included again all the range states as well as the relevant stakeholders or organizations throughout the flyway of that species. And this workshop took place in 2017. This was to grasp ideas and get input from the stakeholders on what are the actual needs, concerns regarding this population. And the same thing for the grey-lag goose. This workshop was hosted in Paris in October 2017, again with different stakeholders going through a structured and facilitated process of getting feedback on, experts and various interests as well. And following these two workshops, the second International Management Planning Workshop was hosted in the Netherlands in 2018. This was back to back with one of the international working group meetings. And since the process of developing management plans under AEWA was something quite new as well, the whole concept of this structured decision-making framework that was introduced to these management plan process differed a lot from the action planning process. And that was one of the reasons why barnacle goose and grey-lag goose had this parallel process in the development of these plans, and have ended up with a very similar framework for action tailored to each species, considering their legal status as well. And so the goal for both of these plans is to maintain the populations in the favorable conservation status while taking into account ecological, economic, and recreational interests. And both plans share very similar fundamental objectives, which include maintaining the population at a satisfactory level, minimizing agricultural conflicts, minimizing the risk to public health and air safety, minimizing the risk to other flora and fauna, maximizing ecosystem goods and services, minimizing cost of goose management, and for the case of the grey-lag goose, provide hunting opportunities that are consistent with maintaining the population at a satisfactory level. So that's the essence of the two management plans. And another new concept that I don't dare to even introduce too much is the concept of the favorable reference value. So the favorable conservation status is defined in what is meant by that, but in fact really clearly defining the minimum necessary values of population size, habitat, and range to ensure that the long-term viability of the population is secured. These values, the definition and the main principles and concepts of developing and agreeing on these values was a process initiated in parallel to the development of the management plan and is part of the management plan as well as the implementation phase. And we've been thinking with some colleagues that it might be this might be another good topic for another webinar, but there is also information on the EGMP website on the entire procedure and the principles of these favorable reference values, which are reflected in the management plans. So as I mentioned, the Barnacle Goose was then adopted by the 7th meeting of the parties in 2018, covering 3 populations. You can see here on the map the different populations: the East Greenland, Scotland, Ireland population, Svalbard, Southwest Scotland population, Russia, Germany, and Netherlands population. And within the Russia, Germany, and Netherlands population, given the different migratory behaviors and sedentary behaviors, there have been 3 management units defined, which essentially helps in the implementation to tailor some of the activities or measures specifically to certain parts or management units of the population. And again, under these species management plan for the barnacle goose, a mandate was given to develop adaptive flyway management programs. And here again, this is a completely new process and mechanism that's been established under AEWA that was not there before. So first of all, the concept of what is an adaptive flyway management program was agreed in the international working group. And also the purpose of this, I'm going to call it AFMP, which is the shortcut, like it being an implementation document for these management plans, which extend for a very long period. But since we're talking about an adaptive process here, the adaptive flyway management programs become the implementation programs of these management plans, allowing more dynamic elements in there, including the definition of the favorable reference values, and it updates the management units and the specific measures for these management units, protocols. In the case of the barnacle goose, the essence of the plan is to assess the cumulative impact of derogations, and also define specific work plans for the task force, for the range states, and update these on a regular basis. So these adaptive flyway management programs become something from a document more to like a living, active plan of work for the range states and all the different bodies from the EGMP. In case of the grey-lag goose for the Northwest Southwest European population, in parallel, it was also developed and adopted by the 7th meeting of the parties. And here we have 1 population, but range states decided on 2 management units consisting of the Norwegian breeding birds, which migrate down to the wintering ground, Netherlands, Spain, and using the stopovers in between. And then the 2nd management unit with the Dutch bird, Belgian, and Northwest German breeding geese. And in this management plan, there is an element which is not included in the barnacle goose plan on the protocols and on the whole adaptive management framework and harvest assessment, which is again also defined and further developed as part of the adaptive flyway management program. So here it has been tailored further towards grey-lag goose, its legal status, the different situations in the different countries as well, and these adaptive management elements as well. So in summary, the EGMP plans are, you know, and the essence and the core implementation work of the EGMP would be the implementation of the action plan with a recovery objective of the tiger bean goose, and then the 3 management plans, pink-footed goose, grey-lag goose, and barnacle goose, as well as the adaptive flyway management programs, which sit underneath the grey-lag goose and the barnacle goose plans. And for you to get a quick overview of the timeline in the past 10 year, well, up to the 10-year timeline, you can see that by now we are in the implementation phase of all these plans. But there is a revision of the pink-footed goose management plan coming up, and the adaptive flyway management programs have a much shorter cycle, and the revision of the AFMPs is coming up in 2026. And before that, there will be different elements of the adaptive flyway management programs added, updated, revised in the cycles that are described in the AFMPs. And again, the adaptive flywheel management programs are a new process, a complex process. And we have also been thinking about having another webinar going deeper into explaining each of these AFMPs and, you know, and define and give a chance to explain exactly what the objectives are and the processes under each of these. And yeah, with that, I conclude, and I hope that this overview has helped you understanding and grasping a bit more the processes under the EGMP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva. I hope it was all clear. Obviously, it's a lot of information to receive and digest, and there will be more coming. Next, we have Gitte Jensen from the Data Centre of the EGMP, and she will introduce a different angle of the EGMP from the perspective of data collection and data management. Please, Gitte, share your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we want to just continue or have a 3 minutes break.
Yeah, we have had a 35-minute session so far. So I'm thinking maybe after your presentation, we take a short break before we come back for a Q&A session.
Okay, perfect.
I hope that everyone could endure another 20 to 25 minutes. Thank you.
Let's see if I can stick to that. Okay, I hope all of you can see my screen and hear me well. Okay. Yeah, my name is Gitte Jensen, and yeah, as Sergey just presented me, I'm the Goose Monitoring Coordinator in the European Goose Management Platform Data Centre. So in the short, I'm responsible for collecting all the data which we use during the annual assessments. I'm also trying to start processes if we see gaps in the data, so start out the new projects so we can get the data here as well. So in short, I'm trying to make the assessment process run as smoothly as possible and have the different elements ready. But taking over from Eva, I'll dig a bit deeper into all the processes in the EGMP. And I'll also touch a bit on what Fred said during the adaptive management webinar, just because we are following in those methods in the EGMP. And some of you may not have participated in that webinar, but it's just some short on it. But as already mentioned a couple of times, the goal of the EGMP is to provide this structured, coordinated, and inclusive decision-making and implementation process. How do we actually want to achieve that? For that, we use a method called the decision analysis or structured decision-making, which in some cases can be adaptive management, which many of you have probably heard on. And here I'll just show the figure that Fred also showed. Because when we are taking a decision, we need to have some objectives. Furthermore, we have actions which will lead us closer to the objectives that we might have. But when doing our actions, if we have no idea about how our actions actually work, so the outcomes are very disputed, then we need to do some joint fact findings so we know at least what kind of action we shall do and maybe also at what levels. Furthermore, if our objectives are very disputed, we can't agree on them, or we are not sure in which direction to go, then we may be out in doing some conflict resolutions. On the other hand, if we are clear about our objectives, we have some understandings of the outcome of our actions, well, then we can use decision analysis and in some cases adaptive management, which I'll come back to. This is not a new method at all. It's just a method used for important decisions and how to address them in a formal manner. And just running through the decision analysis, for those who are not too familiar with it, decision analysis consists of 6 steps. So first we find the decision problems. So it's here that we set the boundaries for our problem. There can be legal boundaries, both nationally and internationally. We may set the boundaries for time and space. There can be certain threats that we are focused upon, or certain problems. Secondly, we articulate the objectives, which Eva already been through for the greylegs and the barnacle goose population. So that can be everything from the population level to agricultural damage or creating hunting opportunities, etc. Furthermore, then we go on to identify the actions. How do we want to achieve the objectives that we have just set? So that could be setting harvest quota, evaluating the use of recommendation areas, promoting goose tourism, etc. And then furthermore, there can be several actions for the different objectives that we might have. Very rarely we know for sure how our action will work in terms of reaching the objectives. And this is where we use our models, where we predict the consequences of the chosen actions in terms of reaching our objectives. And this can both be in terms of predicting the consequences of hunting. It can also be predicting the level of tourists going into a bird reserve, etc. But at least we are trying to predict in the future what the consequences will be of the actions we choose to do. Moreover, we often want to achieve multiple things. And when we want to achieve multiple things, it's rarely that we can do perfect on all of them. And then we need to do some trade-offs. For example, with the tiger bean goose, we want to recover it, but at the same time, we want to allow for some hunting opportunities. Furthermore, when we have used these trade-offs in a formal manner, we can take final. Putting the wrong way here. We can take on the final decisions and taking actions. Now, these actions can be two different things, because first of all, it can just be a one-time decision. I think the best example I can give is we have some islands in Denmark where there is a lot of rat, but we want to eradicate the rats to preserve some birds nesting there. And that could just be a one-time decision. We kill all the rats and hopefully preserve those birds there. And then we don't have to do it again. On the other hand, it can also be multiple decisions, like an iterative process where we revisit our actions and take new decisions each year. This we have for the example with geese, we monitor the population size, we do our predictions and make some recommendation in terms of hunting quota settings, for example, for the pink-footed geese. And in here, we can add another point, which is updating the models. And this is where we go into adaptive management. Because if we have several models or we update our models based on our new data, we can make better predictions in the future. And it's my best example to try to explain how it works is actually not with geese, but with the weather forecast. Because most people, they recognize the weather forecast. It's like something we see daily. And what you see here, that is the rain cover in an area in Denmark, but based on 3 different websites. But it's the same area and it's the same time. You probably all have your favorite website where you go to look for the weather forecast because you think that the weather forecast predicts better how the weather will be. But what we see here is actually 3 different models of the weather forecast. which are using slightly different factors, maybe have slightly different hypotheses about how the weather system is. And how we evaluate which forecast is then the best is to actually see where was the rain and how much did it fall. And then we can value the different models of how well they are predicting. And thereby learn about the system and the different factors which are in these models. On the other hand, if we only had one model, it would, first of all, it would not be adaptive, but we wouldn't learn anything either, because we would just use the same model to predict where the weather would come each year. Yeah, I hope it made it a little bit more clear, the difference between if we were doing adaptive management and reducing uncertainties, or if we are simply just predicting the consequences and using the same model each time. Yeah, that was a little side note. So going back to the overall framework and how it fits into the EGMP, because our documents that we produce each year actually reflects it quite well, I think. First of all, we have the International Single Species Management or Action Plans. I see them as our more strategic documents, which are updated only every 12 years. It's here where we define the overall problems, we articulate the objectives, and we identify the actions. And I like making comparison with something you can visualize. My best example would be that this is the drawing of a car. If we want to go to produce a real car, we first of all make a sketch of it, and that could be this management plan or action plan. We have the Adaptive Flyway Management Program, which is getting into a more operational document, which is updated every 6 years. This is where you can say we built the car based on our sketch. So we put on some more words, some of our problems and our objectives. We make sure that we have indicators for objectives so that there are measurables. We may put a range on our actions and being a bit more precise on all of it. Furthermore, it's also in this document where we present which models we are going to use when we do the predictions for our actions. It's also here where we get very concrete about which trade-offs that we want to perform. Next, we take our operational documents and we make it run. Or you can say that we take a trip in the car and see how it works, because the population and status and assessment report, this is where we run the operation and we present the results. So that's the part down here in the red circle. So we do all the data collection of the raw data. Some of it may need to be processed, and then we do the annual assessment or triannual assessments where we run the models for each population. We do the predictions of the consequences of our actions. We perform the trade-offs and optimizations. For a barnacle goose, we make an assessment of the cumulative impact of derogation and legal hunting. For those species which are huntable, we provide annual management recommendations on the hunting quotas. The next step in this, that is when we take actual decisions, because we may present our assessment for the international working group, and then it's the international working group who takes the final decisions, and these are then presented in the meeting report, which are produced annually as well. And we have one more important report, and that's actually the task force report, because as Eva also mentioned, the task forces for each species and the agricultural one as well, they provide input to the whole process. It's like they are the oil in the process, which make it run as smoothly as possible and provide input for how we can improve things. So what I tried to now was to give you this overall framework of how the EGMP is running and the different processes. or the different documents that we produce. But I guess that many of you maybe have questioned, well, what's specific for the tiger bean goose or pink-footed goose? Because there are different flavors in how the processes are run for each populations. We don't have time to go very deep into each population this time, but please make suggestions if you want to hear about that in other webinars. But what I want to go to now are the populations just in 60 seconds, I called it. Maybe not 60 seconds, but at least just a quick and short overview. So there'll be this table for each population where I'll run through these different elements. I'll just take some water before I start talking even faster. Okay, pink-footed goose in 60 seconds. So for the pink-footed goose, we have a management plan, as we all already mentioned. We have it shall be evaluated in 2024. What we evaluate here are the goals, the objectives, actions, maybe also the models. So all the fundamental parts we take into revision and see if there's something we can do better. We don't have an AFMP for the pink-footed goose, and it's not because we don't have any descriptions or the models or all these operational parts, but they're described in other documents. But as the EGMP developed, we saw the need for actually having these AFMPs where we make some more technical descriptions for making the process more operational. Then we have a target for the pink-footed goose, which is around 60,000. And it's presented quantitatively in a utility function. I don't know if you see my mouse here. There in the optimization process, we value those population sizes which are between 55 and 65,000 higher. And we do that by giving them a utility of 1, whereas population sizes which are even lower or higher than that are giving a lower utility. And as mentioned, we can use it in the optimization process so that we choose actions which are leading or driving the population towards population sizes that get higher utility. It's a bit technical, but in other words, we have a target and it's quantitative, so we can use it in the optimization process. We also have a model. We have an integrated population model, and in terms of the term adaptive management, the model is updated annually. So we learn something about the system and which factors has more effect, or at least how they change. So that could be the survival or the productivity, density dependent processes, etc. So all the time we learn something when we collect the data and can update the models. So here our decision method is adaptive management. Just a short status of the population. The current population size, or the latest one, was around 78,000, which is the 2021 May population estimates. The offtake level were around 60,000. It's a preliminary number because not all hunters have reported the hunting back, but it's more than 90% of the hunters that has reported it this time. The harvest quota, however, which were presented as the most optimal harvest quota in terms of reaching our objectives, were 25,000. But we haven't been able to reach that level. And it only means that it will take longer time for the population to reach the population size target of these around 60,000. Yeah. Because here's the graph of the population size for pink-footed goose, either monitored in May or November. And we see that at the current level, the population is stabilizing. It's just down, not down in the goal yet. Okay. Further on to the tiger bean goose. And as you see in the upper corner, we have the Western, Central, and the two Eastern management units. We mainly have then data from the Central management unit. So I'll start out with that and come back to the Western and two Eastern one. Here with the action plan will be evaluated in 2025. Just as for the pink-footed goose, we don't have an AFP, but again, the models and all the technical details are described in our documents. Opposite the pink-footed goose, we actually don't have a target. We don't have this explicit agreement on the objectives and trade-offs. So we are operating under an iterative harvest strategy. We do have a model, an integrated population model, which was developed recently. And this model is also updated annually so that we can learn about the population. But as we don't have these clear agreements on the objectives, we can't do the optimization process in terms of the ideal harvest level. So we are in a flavor of adaptive management also, as Sergey mentioned it, that we're using part of it. The current population size is almost 76,000, which is based on the March IPM estimates. The latest offtake levels, and here we have some issues because it's very hard to distinguish between tundra bean geese and taiga bean geese. So our estimates here are just in bean geese, but they were at least close to 5,000. Moreover, this is not including any hunting which takes place in Russia. And because we don't have the explicit agreement on objectives, then the range state has to agree on the harvest quota, and they agreed on that to be 3,000. Whereas if we did have agreements on objectives and trade-offs, we could run the optimization process. For the Western and the 2 Eastern management units, the big issue here is that we're very limited in data. We don't have a target, we don't have any models. So we're really out in some joint fact findings here, particularly for the 2 Eastern management units. We do have some knowledge of the Western one, which were a bit more than 1,000 taiga bean geese during the last survey. But there are also potential survey gaps here. The Western one is protected, while the Eastern one is hunted in Russia, presumably, but we don't have any idea about the level. So for these units, we're simply trying to find out more. Grey-leg goose, as Eva mentioned, there are 2 management units, which are very much based on the behavior of the grey-leg geese. So management unit 1 is a migratory unit, where several birds from the management unit 2 are more sedentary birds staying in the same place. These, for both grey-leg and barnacle goose, these are the latest management plans, so the evaluation is not until 2028. The same for the AFMP, which is evaluated in 2026. Currently, we don't have any agreements on objectives and trade-offs, and again, we have some iterative targets of 70,000 breeding pairs for management unit 1 and 80,000 breeding pairs for management unit 2. Something is really happening here with the grey-leg geese because we have several funded projects in the making. One of the projects has the purpose of finding a flyway model for the population for both units, as well as a value model, like that could be one similar to the pink-footed goose or a utility function. Likewise, identifying a set of actions. We also have projects which are trying to estimate the management unit population size for the grey-leg goose, because when we want to manage at management unit level, we need to know the management unit level population size, and the only time of the year we can get that is during the summer period when the units are in each places. So no, we don't have a model and a model update yet, but hopefully we will have it by 2023, where the current decision method, info gap decision model, which are used, the use of that ends in 2023. So we're doing some conflict resolution in terms of agreeing on the final objectives, as well as some joint facts finding in terms of getting more information on the management unit level population size. So the latest estimate for this population were 800,000. There's still a growth rate above 1, meaning that the population is still increasing. But again here, to do the management unit level management, we need the numbers in breeding pairs. And the same goes actually for the offtake. Here we need to be able to distinguish between the breeding period and the post-breeding period, again to assign the offtake level at management unit level. But the current offtake level is about 250,000, which is the latest estimate from 2019, and where there are data missing from Germany and France. So that's also what I mean by at least some fact findings here, that there are still some loose ends where we need to have some more knowledge to be able to do the management which we are requested to do. But using the InfoGap decision model, we can say that the countries can increase their nominal offtake by a maximum 40%, and that's based on the information which were provided in the ISSMP. Moving on to the barnacle goose, just to left. Here we have 3 management units. As Eva was mentioned, we have the Arctic breeding unit, we have the Baltic breeding unit. Both of these units are migratory, and then we have the North Sea unit, which are mainly sedentary. Here we don't have agreements on objectives and trade-offs. We do, however, have an integrated population model, which is also updated each year, so we learn more about the population. So instead of taking, you can say, a decision, what we do in the EGMP is to make an assessment of the cumulative effect of offtake, which we then present this assessment to the International Working Group, and the range state can then do their decision based on the knowledge we have provided them to. The current population size of the Russian population is 1.4 million. But again, just as for the grey leg goose, if we are going to do the assessment of the cumulative effect of offtake at management unit level, we also need to know the population size of each of these units, which again is assessed or estimated during the breeding period or the summertime. The most recent level of offtake, so the number of killed under derogation, is around 60,000 individuals, and that's not including any hunting that may take place in Russia. And again, we need the numbers distinguished into breeding and post-breeding period, so we can assess the effect at management unit level. Finally, we have the Greenland barnacle goose, which in many ways look very similar to the Russian one. We have a model which is updated every 3 years, so we know we're getting to know the population better and which factors are affecting it. We do the assessment of the cumulative effect of offtake, and it's actually, well, we have developed the model, but the first time we are going to do the assessment is in 2023, whereas for the Russian one, we're doing the first assessment this year in 2022. But for now, we have what we need to do this assessment. We have the population size, and since there are no units, we don't have to detangle that number even further. And we also have the derogation level, which are done in Scotland, as well as those shot under hunting on Iceland. But the most recent population size was 73,000 birds in March 2020. The population is only counted as a total count every 3 years. Then we have the offtake level, which were around 4,000, both from derogation and hunting. Yeah, I assume that some of you may be still confused, but hopefully on a bit of a higher level. I know there's there's so much going on here, and we'll try to dig a bit deeper from every time. But of course, the webinar is recorded, so we can always revisit it or send us any questions that you might have. And finally, this is my last slide, but I just wanted to mention that, as Eva said, we are in the implementation phase of a lot of the work that we're doing. And what I have presented is just the dark box down here. So the 1 year cycle, or the 3-year cycle for the barnacle geese. So that's the work down in that cycle. And we have not arrived at the 6-year cycle yet, where we are actually evaluating all the other indicators which there may be and how we are achieving those objectives. So it's not on purpose that or it is on purpose that I haven't mentioned anything about habitat restoration and our take on that, but that's simply just in the, you can say, on the next cycle. So we're getting there. We're getting the wheels to start running one at a time. So our focus has simply just been on this first part for now. So yeah, I think that's. Oh no! Oh, there was one more, because an important output of all of this is also that we want to be as transparent as possible. So first of all, you can find all our documents on the EGMP website. And on the EGMP website, there is a link to the EGMP database where all our data is available, or is going to be available, because we have to make agreements with those providing the data. So some is there, some is not there, but hopefully will be in the future. And from the database, there's a further link to the EGMP Gitte, and that's where we will present all our code that we use during the assessment. So, the goal of that is that if anybody want to run the assessment and redo our results, they should be able to do that. Again, as we are early in the process and we haven't done the assessment for all of the species, it's only those species or populations where we have already done the assessment that the code is available. But as years are coming, everything will be available. So, but otherwise, you're of course always welcome to contact us, and maybe in the chat, if you have ideas or something you would like to hear more about, please tell us, because we would very much like to make sure that everybody understand what we do. Yeah, I think that now there are no more slides. So.
Thank you, Gitte. Thank you indeed for this quite comprehensive presentation. There have been a lot of items that you have shown today. Many of them will deserve their own webinars, and maybe in the future we can organize more in-depth webinars to explore certain topics. And please, you are invited actually to suggest what other webinars you would like to see organized by the EGMP. Just send us emails with your suggestions, what you would like to know more about, so we could consider what to organize in the next months. So we have had a session for just over an hour now, and I think before we proceed with one last short presentation by Eva, which will outline the next steps and what is coming up in the EGMP, followed by the Q&A session, I think we all deserve a short break. It has been a long hour so far. So I would suggest that we reconvene in 6 minutes, which will be at 20 past the hour, wherever you are based. So see you in 6 minutes. Thank you very much. Please do not disconnect. It's 20 past the hour. I hope everyone is back, but let's give one more minute. Eva, if you want, you could share already your screen. And let's give one more minute for people to come back.
Are you not seeing my screen now?
And we're seeing the slide with the break slide.
Ah, yeah. Then.
Yes, now we're seeing the next one.
Super.
Eva, please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. I just wanted to take the opportunity to give a very, very quick overview of what comes next in the next couple of months in the EGMP for those that are interested. Essentially, there is going to be in the next weeks, actually this month, the International Modeling Consortium meeting of the EGMP. There's going to be 2 separate sessions, one on the grey-lag goose and one on the barnacle goose. And this is where the different experts and entities are going to discuss and present their models, data, and results, and start working on the documents that Gitte had introduced beforehand that will go to the International Working Group meeting. There's also a series of task force meetings right now. Actually, almost every week we're having one task force meeting at the moment virtually, and if the pandemic allows, there's going to be a face-to-face meeting of the task forces as well, all of them jointly together, and back-to-back with the International Working Group meeting, which is happening in June this year as well. So hopefully we're keeping the fingers crossed that this will happen in person. The dates for this meeting have been set to the 21st and 23rd of June in Helsinki, Finland, kindly hosted by the Ministries of Environment and Agriculture. And invitations to the International Working Group are also shortly going to go out with more information. But just to give you a very rough overview of what will be discussed in the upcoming meeting, the International Working Group will receive a summary of all the activities that have been implemented by the platform, the Secretariat, the Data Centre, and the different bodies. There will be an agreement on the next steps in the implementation of the International Single Species Action and Management Plans, including the Adaptive Flyway Management Programs. So there will be a few documents on the EGMP website regarding this, as well as the reports and the recommendations from the task forces, as well as their updated work plans for the next cycle and so for the next year. And finally, also the agreement on the administrative and financial matters, as well as the program of work for the next year. So this is, again, just like a very rough overview, and the detailed agenda and meeting documents, they're all going to be available on the EGMP website, and everything will be there a month before the meeting. But before that, we will start, at least within the International Working Group and the task forces, already working and circulating drafts of these documents. And perhaps the main document, I thought this could be useful, at least for some of you that might be attending that meeting, to pay attention to, is that there will be some proposal on changes to the modus operandi of the platform, what to do if new range states join the platform, more of these procedural matters. And also very, very, very important would be the population status and assessment reports, the agreement on the new management strategies for the following years, pretty much the points that Gitte detailed in her presentation. And the reports and recommendations of the task forces. These are always very short, concise documents, but they show in a very quick glimpse the huge amount of fantastic work that the task forces are doing and what they're recommending to the range states. And really, the International Working Group is takes the recommendations of the task forces very serious, and the other really important point is that one of the topics that has been discussed within the EGMP is the whole communication work, how to improve the communication and transparency of the EGMP, how to make sure that the EGMP is understood properly, that the processes are understood, that it actually reaches the relevant stakeholders also on a national level, not only on this international level, how the EGMP can help the countries to produce, disseminate information. I think this webinar series was one trial to also make sure we're recording these webinars, adding them on our YouTube channel, just to make sure that these processes are communicated and just filter through all the different layers. And yeah, and for those interested, obviously the administrative part, the program of work of the EGMP, which kind of shapes what's happening in the platform in the coming year. And yeah, that's all, just a very quick overview. Thanks.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you indeed. With this last short presentation, we have concluded the introductions to today's webinar. And now we are available here to respond to your questions or any other inquiries you may have, or even statements and that you would like to make. I haven't seen any postings in the chat. Don't be shy. Actually, we see the first one, which is quite lengthy. This is from Vicky Jones. Vicky, can I invite you maybe to introduce your question, because it's very lengthy for me to read it, and I think it will be better if it comes from you.
Sure. Can you hear me okay, Sergey?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting that you've learned so much through this process under the European Goose Management Platform, from all of the kind of more factual end things like, you know, how to set the minimum needs for modeling and baselines and targets, data quality standards, but also on how to run the process, so to minimize conflict and to maximize transparency and bring everyone along with you in the process. And now there are these other processes going on for other species, for example, turtle dove, adaptive harvest management, and adaptive management being contemplated for sake of falcon under CMS. So I'm really happy to see that all the documentation is there and transparent on the website, but I'm wondering if there's a way to distill out the key experience, the key hurdles, and how they were overcome into some kind of lessons learned or advice guide that could be used by other processes. I mean, obviously the circumstances around each species are different and the stakeholders are different, but one process should be able to build on another. Yeah, I'm just wondering what the panel thought about that.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky, for that question. Indeed, it's a very important topic. EGMP has been here for a while, and the pink-footed goose management plan was the precursor of that, and it has been practically, we've been running this kind of processes on adaptive management for the last 10 years. It's not a short period of time. We still have a long way ahead of us, in a matter of fact, even with the populations that are currently covered by the EGMP. But for the 10 years, you're right, there have been a lot of lessons learned, and it might be beneficial if we distill them and we summarize them in view of the other processes that are being established also by other platforms. Currently under AEWA, we also having a draft action plan for the common IDA, which has elements of adaptive management, including harvest management. We're of course going to use the lessons learned from the experience in the EGMP. These are practically the same range states within the range of the common IDA that will be involved in the implementation of that plan. So transition will be quite easy. But you're right that the common, the Seika and the turtle dove processes might benefit from a distillation of what has happened under the EGMP in order to inform how they approach their processes. Eva, maybe I see that you have raised a hand. Maybe you could fill in on this issue here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I really think this is an excellent point, and I just wanted to point you to one document that has been developed and that will be submitted to the meeting of the parties, which is the management plan format. That includes some of at least the structure and like the process and some guidelines on how to develop management plans based on the experience and the procedure we had for the barnacle goose and for the greylag goose. That could be, you know, some guidance, but I agree, and I think it is something that we can bring back to the international working group or even to the task force. We'll have to see how to develop a set of guidelines for the process, and, you know, pull some of the I don't know, to those of you that have attended and heard the webinar given by Fred on adaptive management, there are a lot of lessons learned from different places, and in the EGMP also a lot of mistakes that we've done, or, you know, or failures of, you know, communicating things properly or running. So there are definitely lessons learned, and I think it could be a nice output of the platform to develop some sort of guidelines. Perhaps even also have a webinar on lessons learned in addition. We'll definitely bring this back to the EGMP group. Thank you very much for that suggestion.
That will be for the benefit of the broader conservation community. Of course, this is an additional task for the EGMP Secretariat and the Data Centre and the task forces, but it will be also beneficial for the EGMP itself, because we don't have what we have learned over the 10 years in one place gathered. So probably this will be welcomed indeed by the range states, and it will take some time to develop it, but stay tuned. We will bring this up at the next working group meeting in June, and we will set up a process how to develop those and how to disseminate them. Thank you, Vicky, for this useful intervention and suggestion. Any other questions or suggestions from the floor, please? You could also request for the floor rather than typing. Vicky, you took a long time probably to type your message. Sorry for that. But for a shortcut, if you want to ask a question, please also just ask for the floor. Yes, Misty, please go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I think my question would probably be better directed to Gitte. I was just wondering, with establishing targets, and it seems like agreeing on those objectives and trade-offs seems to be a common hurdle. Are there common inhibiting factors or obstacles, or getting to that point, is it just not far enough in the process, or is it situationally specific?
I think very much that it's where we are in the process. So we have developed the management plan and the AFMP, and now we are just getting further into the process, and actually also just getting funding for doing some of the job. Has also been an obstacle, but we have it for the greylag now, and we'll move on with that. So I think it is mainly that where we are in the process to get it started. Yeah.
Thank you, Gitte, for addressing this question. Anyone else from the floor, please? I hope it was really very clear. And that's why you don't have questions. That could be the opposite. Fred, please good to see you here.
Good morning, everyone. Well, afternoon. Yeah, just to follow up to get his response to Misty. You know, developing objectives when you've got a really diverse group of stakeholders is always, for me, the most challenging part of these sort of processes. Much harder than developing population models, for example. And you know, I've been doing this for a while now in the U.S. and I wish I had sort of a magic bullet for doing this, but I don't. We use, for gray lag use, we use the multi-criteria decision analysis process where we looked at possible outcomes from managing for different objectives and then tried to get some level of consensus among stakeholders because there's always going to be trade-offs and not every stakeholder is going to get all that they want. But if you have stakeholders engaged or the representatives engaged in a transparent process, then in the end, I think most stakeholders are willing to recognize that they're going to have to compromise, their values to some extent to enable to get a level of consensus among all stakeholders, so that you can move forward. That process with gray lags took quite a bit of time, involved a lot of both technical people and decision makers. And we learned a lot from it. I think in the end it worked very well. But unfortunately, for groups that are working on other species outside of AEWA, for example, and all, there's probably just not enough level of expertise out there in terms of facilitating this sort of process to get agreement on objectives and perhaps population targets that are reflective of those objectives and of the relevant values. So anyway, hopefully these other groups and other processes can learn from our experience. We do have a publication out there about gray lags and how we went about doing that. But your point's well taken. It's very challenging, and again, I think probably the most difficult part of the process.
Thank you very much, Fred, for these clarifications. Indeed, for those who don't know Fred, Fred belongs to the Data Centre at Aarhus University and has been involved in the EGMP processes from the very start, actually with the first pink-footed goose management plan, already at the time when he was still working for the USGS. Here we have another question from Joseph van der Stegen from the European Commission. Joseph, please go ahead.
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you very much, colleagues, for those very interesting and useful presentations, because they summarize a lot all the information we need to have in mind, and from time to time, because of course we have many other things ongoing. But I have a question on habitat. I know that Gitte at the end very briefly touched on habitats, but could you further expand a bit on that? How do you deal with the habitat aspect? Because, as you know, of course, some of those species, all the species relying on good habitats. Sometimes the good habitats, the wetlands have disappeared. So improving the habitats is also a means to deal with conflicts. And we had a very good presentation from the Aarhus University, if I remember well, in Denmark related to that. So my question would be, yes, how do you deal with the habitat aspects? And maybe I missed something at the end of the presentation, but I would be happy to have some more information of course, I'm aware of what I've seen in the annual meeting, but I would be happy to have here some information. Thank you.
Would you like to take that, Gitte?
Well, I think I will get back to that, as I mentioned in the last slide, that we are in the process of these annual and triennial assessments, and there have been a lot of work related to that. But we're having a meeting in the data center as well, in terms of how we are going to take a move on the indicators for other objectives not related to population size or offtake levels for some species. And that is where we will also have the discussions on habitat restorations, which of course where we will take on some of the lessons that they have learned from Jesper Madsen's. They have done some field experiments here in Denmark in terms of habitat restoration to attract the geese, but also how to use different accommodations areas and how all of that fits together. So I would say from what I know, we're very in the beginning of the phase of how we specifically are going to address that. But Sergey or Eva or Fred, or if you have more, please add to it.
Thank you, Gitte. Thank you. I see, Eva, you have raised your hands. I assume it's on this topic. Please go ahead.
Yes, exactly. I just wanted to add to what Gitte already said, that you know, as part of the management plans and also the adaptive flyway management program, there is this section on the box 1 information, we call it, which is basically information needed in each adaptive flyway management program concerning damage and site protection. And within that, there is a paragraph stating that each AFMP shall contain this information on habitat conservation measures, and such as also the designation of special protection areas and you know, all the list of that, the management of the species in these areas and outside, tackling the damage and all of that. And it is for sure something that has been added to the agenda. I've seen it in some of the task force meetings agendas, but to be honest, we just haven't reached that stage yet. We've just reached the point where the AFMPs have been adopted, where an initial assessment has been done, where the initial, you know, ground or like way have been paved, and now that we're in the implementation phase, this is one of the actions that's added, and the right for it for the discussion here are the task forces.
Thank you, Eva, for that. I see, Gitte, you raised your hands on the same topic.
Yeah, because I'm actually we should just have been 1 week earlier later, because next week in Denmark we have a workshop only on barnacle goose management, and where one of the major topic would also be habitat restoration and how we can use it for managing the barnacle goose in Denmark. So it is definitely something which is on the agenda now. So we're just still very early in the process, and after Tuesday, at least I can say more about how their thoughts about how to dealing with it in Denmark.
Thank you, Gitte, for that useful information as well. Good to see that some of the range states to the EGMP are taking the process more holistically rather than just looking into harvest. It's encouraging that the other targets in the action plan are also paid attention to. Any other questions from the floor? We still have 16 minutes to the end of the webinar, as we have announced it. So use those 16 minutes wisely. Eva posted in the chat again that if you have any wishes for further more detailed information on any topic that the EGMP is dealing with, you are welcome to drop us an email in order to inform us of that, and we will consider organizing a webinar or clustering it with other topics for future events. I don't see anyone else asking for the floor. I see a few reactions in the chat, but they're not questions. I'll give you one last chance if you want to raise any other topic. We have 14 minutes left, but if it was all clear, maybe we could finish the webinar a little bit earlier. And you could concentrate on your other tasks for the day. Okay, we have one more question from Joseph from the Commission. Please, Joseph.
Yes, thank you. I'm seizing this opportunity. I know that this was addressed by John at the previous seminar, but still, I mean, an important aspect when we try to manage a species is uncertainty, and that's of course at the core of the exercise. But still, I'm wondering. I know that there is a big lack of data as regards lack of data as regards the population in Russia for the gray-lag goose, for instance. And but my question is basically how to overcome that. I know that is a very general question, but it's a question that we will have for any adaptive harvest management. So I would be happy to have a rather general answer to that. I mean, although there might be specific answers to each case, but yes, I would be happy because it's a really big issue when we deal with that. Thank you.
Fred, would you like to take this question?
I'm not sure I'd like to, but I will try. Yeah, Joseph, you're exactly right. It's a really big challenge once we get past, you know, the few well-studied species. There's no doubt that, you know, trying to make reasonable decisions about the management and conservation of population requires some level of ongoing monitoring. What we've started to do is to try to understand what's the minimum level of information that we have to make reasonably good decisions. And we just completed a study. We took pink-footed geese, which we probably have more data on, know more about than probably any water bird population in Europe. And we started asking questions about, well, what if some of these monitoring instruments that have been in place for a very long time for pink-footed geese, what if we didn't have those? What if we had not had those in the past? Could we still make reasonable decisions about managing the offtake of pink-footed geese? And the good news out of that was largely that it does only take a minimum amount of information. And if you're managing offtake, and whether it's derogations or whether it's sport harvest, you know, you often can make reasonable decisions as long as you have periodic estimates of population size and periodic estimates of the offtake. And we understand enough about the life history of geese that just with those two pieces of information, we can do a reasonable job. If we start managing populations in smaller management units, then things get a lot more complicated. And then there's a whole bunch of species, I suspect, that we don't have good periodic estimates of population size or harvest. And so an example is what we did with gray lag geese a few years ago, because there was pretty good evidence that the data that we had were not all that good, probably biased in some cases. And so, you know, you always have to make the best decisions you can based on the available data. You know, we as scientists are you know, really bad about always saying we need more data, we need more data. And what I try to impress upon people is that, well, you know, more data is not always very practical. So we have to learn how to do make the best decisions we can, often with data that's not of the quantity or quality that we would like. And so there are decision-making protocols that allow us to do that. But, you know, in the end, the quality of your decision's only going to be as good as the quantity and quality of your data. But because we can't always achieve the quantity and quality we'd like, we have available to us decision processes that account explicitly for that uncertainty, and that would enable us to make the best decisions we possibly can in the face of what data we do have. And so we'll be, you know, monitoring programs are sort of front and center now in terms of trying to develop these adaptive flyway management plans and so forth. And so we'll be talking about this topic a lot more in the coming years.
Thank you, Fred, for addressing this important question. Indeed, it's an issue that we'll be encountering in the future as well. It's not an issue of the past. Meanwhile, we had a couple of postings in the chat. I'll start with the last one. Francis suggested inviting champions, the way Fred defined them in his previous webinar, inviting them to give an account of their success stories. And we will look into that, and we will consider organizing an event, bringing those people that have been firsthand involved in this kind of processes. And then we have a question from Aradna. She's asking whether we could elaborate more on the feral bird conservation status. Well, unfortunately, today we don't have our feral bird conservation status guru with us to give an elaborate response to that. And in any case, I believe the concept of the feral bird conservation status does indeed require and deserve a standalone webinar. So Eva, maybe you could pencil in such a request for a webinar on FSCs. Just to say that, as I said at the beginning in my introduction, the maintenance or restoration to a feral bird conservation status of the AEWA populations is the fundamental principle of the agreement. In fact, this is what we as a community and the parties that have acceded to this treaty have committed to achieve. The concept itself is a concept that we take from the Convention on Migratory Species, which is the mother convention of the agreement. The African Eurasian Waterbird Agreement, for those who are not aware, was developed as a regional treaty under the provisions of the Global Convention on Migratory Species. And wherever we are lacking definitions, for example, we are using mutatis mutandis, those that are provided by the convention. And in the legal text of the convention, there is a definition of feral bird conservation status. And we have developed that concept in the framework of the EGMP because in fact, it has not been applied in any way, either under CMS or any other treaty of the convention. So AEWA is the first treaty which has actually made the effort to put into practice the application of that concept. And this is something that we are considering to further develop. EWA is currently posting links to some documentation on this, which is available in relation to the EGMP processes, but the concept has a much broader application under AEWA, because eventually that's what we're measuring against the success of the implementation of the treaty. How many of the populations have actually been restored or maintained in such a favorable conservation status. However, defining the so-called favorable reference values, which are the values that you need in order to measure the favorable conservation status, is a very complex process, and there is still not a unified agreement on how to do that. For example, we have had multiple communications and consultations with the European Commission on this matter, because under one of the European Union directives on the Habitats Directive, there is the same concept, which is very similar to CMS. There is a small difference between the CMS and the European Union definitions of the favorable conservation status. However, this doesn't exist under the Birds Directive, which is the one under which the AEWA species also fall within the context of the European Union. The European Commission, however, has assured us that despite of that, the concept is being applied also in the context of bird conservation in the European Union. And when we have been developing the approaches to the application of that concept in the context of EGMP, we have used some of the materials developed under the European Union directives. And we have a preliminary agreement with the European Commission to further develop the tools and methods of applying that concept and defining in particular the favorable reference values. So this is still very much a work in progress, but it will, in fact, it started with the EGMP, for first time applying it in real life. But we are actually aiming at expanding the application of that concept in further processes, not only in goose conservation and management, but also any other taxa for which we develop specific conservation projects. It's probably unrealistic to be able to define favorable reference values for all AEWA populations because of the complexity of achieving that, not because we don't want to. And in many cases, we'll be simply lacking the data to underpin that process. So for the time being, this is probably as much as we could share today, also because we are running out of time. But we have taken note that this is a topic of interest and indeed is a very important issue. And we will be aiming at organizing a webinar in future to bring that concept closer to you. Thank you very much. So we have 2 minutes left. So one quick question from the floor, if any. I see that the number of survivors is dropping in this webinar. We're down to 37. But I'll give you one last chance if you want to raise any last points. Eva, please.
If there are no other questions, I just wanted to use the opportunity to thank all the members of the International Working Group and the task forces, the coordinators, and everyone that's been working so super hard to make this process happen, and have the patience to learn with us and improve and fall again and again and keep standing up. So I think it's definitely big applause to everyone for the hard work and commitment.
Thank you, Eva, for these words. Indeed, it's a process which is a paradigm shift in terms of water bird management, and not only water bird management, wildlife management in Europe. And we hope that what EGMP has achieved so far and the lessons that have been learned under this process will serve for a bigger good in terms of wildlife conservation in Europe. And we hope that the program will continue growing and will continue delivering. And as I said, we are already seeing ahead of us other taxa than geese, which are going to be subject of adaptive management and adaptive harvest management in particular. So thank you indeed for all the commitment from the range states to make this happen, to bring to life this exemplary process, and for working on it for quite a long time. 10 years, starting with the pink-footed goose, is quite a significant period of time. But in order to start bearing the fruits, it will still take some effort, and this will require diligence and commitment and investment, of course, because the investment that has been made at international level is critical, obviously, for running such an intergovernmental process at flyway level. But it all needs to trickle down to national and local level, because this is where magic is happening. Implementation is happening on the ground, and it's happening also, at national level. It requires coordination and planning, and we need to strengthen those processes at those levels. And this is when we will start actually seeing the results. And it's promising indeed, because the tiger bean goose process for the central management unit shows us that, with commitment and investment, change is possible, and it could be maintained in the longer term. So thanks indeed to everyone who has been involved so far, and we hope to see more people joining the effort that is happening here in the EGMP, and also expanding the EGMP concept further to other taxa. And indeed, one day, hopefully, we'll have a truly pan-European program or platform that encompasses all the efforts that different stakeholders and different frameworks are actually making for adaptive management. I would like to mention that the European Commission is convening a EU initiative along the same lines of adaptive management, and we'll be talking very soon how to coordinate on that. So we're very pleased to see that the EGMP, what EGMP started 10 years ago, now is spreading and is giving a good example that is being picked up by various other frameworks, at least in Europe. And hopefully with the time, this will spread even further, but that's probably after I retire. I don't think we will be able to go that far within the next 10 to 20 years. Let's aim at first for a pan-European platform, and then this hopefully will create the critical mass and experience that will allow us to jump over to other geographical areas as well. So we are 3 minutes past the hour, and thank you very much for your time and for your interest in this topic. And you'll be hearing from us very soon with the next topics that we'll be bringing closer to you with the EGMP webinars. Have a good rest of the day, and stay safe and healthy. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.